within the brain. And if you've taken EP psychology, you're going to know way more about the brain than we're going to get into. But the brain, I think we all know what the brain is. It's wrinkled, meaning that it has folds, which is always going to allow us to increase surface area. The surface anatomy, we have three basic parts. We have the hemispheres, which are the large pieces, cerebellum, and the brain stem. Now, we already know a little bit about the central nervous system, and so we know that the central nervous system consists of the spinal cord and the brain. Now, this is going to be the processing center. It's always going to be the integration center of the entire nervous system, because we are going to always have information go in, and then it's going to integrate or interpret, and then it's going to send some information out. So this is just showing you the brain here, the cerebrum, cerebellum, and then it's showing you the different parts of the spinal cord and the brain stem. Now within the brain, we have 4 ventricles. And ventricles, they're going to be spaces. And what is going to go through these spaces is cerebrospinal fluid. And we talked briefly about ependymal cells. They're a neuroglial cell that circulates cerebrospinal fluid. And what the cerebrospinal fluid is doing is it's nourishing and cleaning and taking waste away from the brain. It is replaced every 8 hours, and it's going to drain. And it's going to drain through our 4th ventricle, and it drains into the bloodstream, and then the waste products will be taken to the urinary system, and you will urinate those wastes out. Now, sometimes the drain portion, the portion that's draining into the blood, it gets clogged and it won't drain. And so we call that hydrocephalus, and that means water on the brain. And this can happen in all kinds of situations, but sometimes babies will get this. And what happens in this situation is when the water, or it's not water, it's cerebrospinal fluid, which is mostly made up of water, starts to accumulate, it puts pressure on the brain and the nerves sometimes will kind of short out, and you can end up with brain damage. So these are the ventricles, and so we're going to be just washing the brain with all of the cerebrospinal fluid, and then eventually it's going to then get back into the bloodstream, and all of those wastes will be eliminated. Now the cerebral hemispheres, if you're looking at the brain, the folded part that we always think of as the brain is the cerebrum, and it forms the superior part of the brain and makes up about 83% of its mass. So what it has is it has folds, and when we have these folds, they form these ridges, which we call gyri, or grooves, which are sulci or sulcus. And if you have a really deep groove, they call it a fissure. Now, the right and the left cerebral hemispheres are separated by a really, really deep groove called the longitudinal fissure, which you guys will see pictures of. So there are lobes. You have lobes in your brain, and the lobes are mainly going to be named after the bone that protects it. So we have a frontal lobe, which our frontal bone protects, a parietal lobe, which our parietal bone protects, temporal bone, occipital bone, and then something called the insula. So it says deep sulci. So if I go back a slide, you would know that those are those little grooves. It says the central sulcus, again a groove, sorry, I did not mean to do that, separates the frontal and parietal lobes. We're going to get into what each lobe does for the body and what it's controlling. So you can see this is the central sulcus. You've got your frontal lobe, you've got your parietal lobe, you've got your temporal lobe here, and then inside you've got this little insula. Now, at the very beginning of the year, we talked about these serous membranes that protect all of your different organs. Well, instead of having a serous membrane, a real thin membrane, we have a thicker membrane that's going to protect our central nervous system. So we call them meninges. And so they're going to cover and protect the central nervous system, protect all the blood vessels in there so that we are making sure that our brain always has enough oxygen. They contain the cerebrospinal fluid and then form partitions in the skull. We will be dissecting a brain during this unit, and we will look at the different parts of the brain, but you will be able to see some of those connective tissue membranes. There are 3 layers to the meninges. We have the outermost meninge, or meninx, and it is called the dura mater. And it's really, really, really thick connective tissue because we want enough protection. So we have bone that's protecting it, but we want even further protection because of the fact that it's our most important organ. Then we have something called the arachnoid mater, and that's in between. It's the middle meninges, and it's very web-like, and so that's why they called it the arachnoid. And then we have pia mater. This is much thinner than the dura mater, and it is it clings actually right onto the brain. You will definitely see this layer when we dissect. It's kind of a shiny layer on the brain itself. Now, dura mater is thicker, and dura mater translates literally to tough mother, and pia mater translates to gentle mother.